Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Nuggets News. Well, you guys seemed to really enjoy last week's episode where I spoke about censorship and freedom of speech, crackdowns, the way the world is heading and who's really pulling the strings behind the scene, all that sort of thing. So we've got another video in that line of thought today as we've had this misinformation, disinformation bill being pushed, and you've probably seen it in the news or on Twitter X. Hopefully some of your favorite social media influencers are following this because we need to get this information out there. So please share this video around with your friends and family that you think need to go down the rabbit hole and have their eyes open to what's really going on, because I'll link to the document itself down below. But if you have a look through the 73 pages, it's pretty disturbing on how they're describing what is disinformation, misinformation, and the form. So everything from text to data, speech, visual, images, animated. So think about memes and that type of thing. And also, if we scroll down a little bit more here, just the platforms and what counts as sharing. So between different, think of it as any digital service or app or search engine website, even text messages, MMSs. Really nothing is left alone here. So really scary, Orwellian stuff, complete crackdown. And one of the things I spoke about in last week's episode was how Australia was a test bed for everything that's happening and all these different agencies you hear about, AUKUS, the Five Eyes Alliance, Australia being a member of these, all the different intelligence agencies, share information and whatnot. And this is all part of that big agenda you hear people talk about from the World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization. Bill Gates was here meeting with Prime Minister Albanese last year, and they were talking about, one of the biggest threats being online disinformation, misinformation, and that type of thing. So pretty scary. We know Australia had the harshest lockdowns and mandates. And again, I really think now that more and more people are waking up to, maybe we are the test bed for, let's see how hard you can crack down on the internet, free speech, censorship, and all that before people finally push back. So thankfully we do have some senators and some of our pollies that are making a bit of noise about how crazy this is, but just some of the stuff in here about it excludes governments, media and universities. So we know that these guys are all owned by the same people pulling the strings. So now basically anything where you don't agree with what they're saying, they can deem what's true and what's not. And think about that in the context of everything that's happened the past few years and how scary that is, where people aren't allowed to have discussions and openly debate things. We'll get into some more examples in just a second, but the openness of this language and the way they use just words like harm, well, who really deems what is harm? And we've seen some of the ministers in charge of this stuff. We know they're going to want to make an example of people, just like we've seen in the UK, and that type of thing, where people are in jail for retweeting something, posting something on Facebook. So this will go a step further. Think about into your text messages and your memes and your WhatsApp group or whatever it is. You're just not allowed to say anything that questions the establishment, because they can say, hey, that's harmful. Now, let's go through a few of these categories, and we know that this is all the stuff that's been really topical and really dividing people. And remember, the whole playbook here for the elite is to divide and conquer. They want you divided and fighting on every issue. We used to live in a time and in a world where people and friends could disagree over one issue and still go for the same footy team or still have same beliefs about another issue and get along. Whereas now, people just snap emotionally, and it's like we've lost the ability to have these open discussions and disagree on things and openly debate and say, maybe I'm wrong, or as new information comes in, we stay open-minded that the truth might be different to what we thought or what we've been told. But have a look at some of these other ones here. So just harm to the health of Australians. We know there's talk of the next pandemic and the next threat in that arena. Harm to the Australian environment, all the stuff we hear about, climate change and that. Economic or financial harm. I think this one is probably the most scary. Anything that can harm the Australian economy or a sector of the Australian economy. So have a think about even just videos that we've done talking about crypto over the years. Is that now, is that a threat to the banking system if we're talking about Bitcoin being a better way to save money because of the amount of fiat that's been printed and this inflation that's getting worse? Or all the videos we've done about gold and silver. Is that an alternative that's a threat if everyone decides that, hey, the Aussie dollar is losing its value, our economy's in the tank, and more people choose those as an options to store wealth? Is that a threat to the financial system here in Australia, and they can push these laws against you? So pretty wild stuff. We've made an amazing network of contacts in the crypto space, the gold and silver space. I'm sure all these other, hopefully, channels that you're following. This is a huge threat to everyone. Martin North has been doing stuff in the housing market, talking about financial stress. Is he now not allowed to do that because it undermines people's faith in maybe property as an investment in Australia? We know how important it is for them to protect that. So the other thing that scares me in healthcare, I know a lot of people, the whole COVID thing comes to mind when we're talking about that, but think about a good friend of mine, Gary Fecky, and everything he's been through. So he was an orthopedic surgeon, a diabetic surgeon. We had him on the channel 4 years ago when we were talking about big pharma and the food industry. If you're not familiar with his story, the short version is that he was cutting off diabetics that have got necrotic fingers and toes or whatever. Their diabetes has got so bad that you need to cut off that dead tissue. But they'd go back to the hospital ward and be fed, sugary drinks and sugary foods. And he said, you can't do that. It's really dangerous for these people that don't have good blood sugar control, and their flesh is literally dying. I've just cut it off. And he got told, well, we've got a contract. The hospital's got a contract with Kellogg's. Basically, what they want comes above what is best for the patient from the expert doctor. Now, he got deregistered, he fought that battle and won, but these things are happening everywhere now. You've heard about it so many times. How many hundreds or thousands of doctors just in Australia and around the world are standing up and saying, hey, look, I got suspended for my thoughts and just sharing what I was seeing firsthand on the front lines because that went against the narrative that was being pushed. So how can we ignore, these doctors that are fighting for, freedom, and they do want what's best for people? They're all going to be silenced. You're not allowed to question anything if this all gets passed going forward. Another thing they're talking about now is fining the internet platforms themselves 5% of their global revenue for failing to prevent it. So they're going to put in these bills and then basically put it on the tech companies to police. Again, I just don't know how this works in reality. Talking about banning social media for kids, maybe VPNs come under threat, or saying that you won't be allowed to use a VPN to get around these websites that they're going to block. So at the moment, they're talking about social media for kids, but we know how this can go. If they don't like the podcast you listen to, the websites where you're getting your news, we've already seen them maybe try and ban Twitter X in Australia. So saying, hey, you can't even use a VPN to get around it. If someone is saying something different to what the government tells you is happening, you're not allowed to believe it. You're not allowed to talk about it. You're not allowed to share that. Really crazy Orwellian stuff. At the same time, a lot of these things that are being pushed and being welcomed, this whole woke movement under the guise of acceptance and equality, I think more and more people are questioning, well, is this really right? Or where do you draw the line between someone's right to express themselves freely how they want and pushing this stuff down the throats of kids? We don't let kids drink till they're 18 or get tattoos, vote. There's reasons why we have these laws in place for the protection of minds that aren't fully formed to make the right decisions. And we've seen in other countries where kids have been taken away from their parents if their parents say, hey, I don't know if I support this. My child being taught this in schools from such a young age, and now we think the right answer is to mutilate these kids and sterilize them and inject them with these synthetic hormones and blockers, and they become a patient and a profit for the pharmaceutical industry for the rest of their life. And a lot of the data shows people that do or have undergone these transitions young, majority of them regret that decision and have serious mental health impacts from it. Yet all this is above board and A-OK. Look at this book that's been nominated as a finalist in our National Literacy Awards. Talking about this stuff for kids as young as 8. And this is okay. This is going to be taught at our schools and be an award-winning book. And I think a lot of people are saying, well, I don't know if this is okay with me, but this is okay, but some of these other things they're saying aren't. So I guess the final thing here as well, in terms of a lot of the trans stuff that's in the news lately, the government themselves haven't been able to give us a good definition of what is a woman. So all these arguments you see online about, I want to transition to a woman, I'm free to express myself as a woman. Should a biological man be able to transition and then breastfeed a baby? You know, none of this is in touch with nature and the way things have been working pretty well for thousands of millions of years. And people saying, well, I don't know if that is right. And this is something that people want to be able to talk about, because, you know, if we keep going down this path of just more and more crazycal radicalness, where does it end? If anyone is allowed to do whatever they want to do under the guise of free speech, if it's okay with what the government says versus people that want to live, I guess, a more traditional lifestyle and live in touch with nature, eat healthy foods, these types of things seem to be becoming almost like the government wants to outlaw them and make them fringe ideals, and embrace the craziness. Again, the whole big plan here of the elites, I think, is to break down the fabric of society and cause chaos, divide us on every issue, and then it's easier to control people. That's exactly what they're doing, trying to take away more freedoms. Now, thankfully, we've got all these huge podcasts, and I spoke about last week's episode, this rise of a decentralized army where there's so many people that are trying to do real journalism, independent journalism, get experts on that aren't bought and paid for by the pharmaceutical industry, the news industry, the banking system, being bought off in government. And that's why these people have surpassed the mainstream in terms of viewership. Russell Brand, Tucker Carlson's #1 podcast in the world now, PBD. So there's so many of these channels that are getting all this info out there. So I don't think you can stop that. Is Australia going to block all these channels on YouTube and Spotify and X for people that are trying to tell the truth? Or are we not going to do anything about it? And we wake up in this world where you're not allowed to say anything. You know, we've already got the cameras in our homes, on our phones, all our devices. We know that's all being monitored these days. So that next step of just being able to say something or think something in future, is that the path that we're heading down? So I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Again, spread it around, get the word out there. We need to get this stuff out there and fight back. As always, if you want some of our crypto research stuff, head over to nuggetsnews.com.au. We do have a free tier in there now, as well as all our usual pricing for our premium crypto research and all the best projects. Smash that like button, share this video around. I'll talk to you guys again soon. Cheers.